Hey guys, welcome back to another tutorial. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to make this coffee themed foam drip tumbler using the print from my Peachy Olive Glitters collab box. This print was hand drawn by Mal from Made by Manny and Mal. And as usual, I will have all of the products in the description box below with all of my discount codes for you guys. Let's go ahead and get into this tutorial. Using this wavy line template from Happy Fox Supply Co., I'm going to cut it out at 4 inches tall by 10.1 inches wide. The 30-ounce skinny tumbler that I'm using is exactly 10 inches, but I wanted to give myself a little bit of an overhang so I didn't end up cutting it short at any point. And so once I had my measurements taken care of, I'm going to use this tool from the Amy's Make Everything to ensure that I have a completely straight line at the base of my tumbler, which will then ensure that my vinyl is laying completely straight. So we're going to lay that vinyl down using the hinge method. I'll cut off about 1 inch of the backing and press the vinyl down onto the cup while simultaneously pressing the backing off the vinyl. You'll see here that there's just a little bit of an overhang and that the waves don't meet. So I'm going to cut the seam where they overlap, and then once I've got that taken care of, I'm just going to freehand with my X-Acto and kind of make the two seams connect, if that makes sense. So you want to make sure that there's not any sort of like a gap or a kind of a step up, I guess I would say, from the two seams of vinyl. So we're gonna, once all of the glitter's laid down and everything's epoxied, we're gonna hand lay down the vinyl striping on that. So we'll manipulate that vinyl to ensure that it looks like a seamless pattern. Full disclosure here, I had a completely different idea for this tumbler when I first started it. I was going to use inks at the top to swirl those to look like kind of cream swirling into black coffee, and it did not work out. So I scrapped that idea and I spray painted over it because it was a hot mess. And then I decided we were going to go in with glitter. So you'll see that it's a little bit lumpy here because the inks were a little bit wavy. So I'm just going to spray paint over that. And I put it on my turner and put a coat of epoxy over it. So we were able to start with a clean slate and it was a smooth base. And then I'm going to tape off the vinyl print here so I don't get any cross-contamination. We don't have any epoxy or any glitter sticking to that vinyl. We'll apply the glitter using the epoxy method here. I'm using probably less than 1 milliliter of epoxy, and then we'll go in with 4 glitters from Peachy Olive Glitters. The first one being Cold Brew as the darkest. The second one will be Macchiato. The third will be Frannie, that was in my Peachy collab box that was released last month. And then the last one is one of my favorites, which is Chantilly on an ivory base. That is just to kind of replicate the cream. I was going for like an iced caramel macchiato look, if you know what that looks like from Starbucks, where it's kind of darker and settled at the bottom and then it gets lighter as it goes up. So I'm gonna start out and use the lightest glitter first. This, if we were to lay the darkest down first, it kind of takes over the light. So I wanted to make sure that that light was laid down first, and then we'll blend the darker colors into the light colors. So starting out at the base, that is the Cold Brew, and then we're gonna blend the Macchiato into Cold Brew and a little bit up into where Frannie is going to be. You're going to be very light-handed, sprinkling this down while angling your tumbler at about a 45-degree angle and tapping it off as you go. So you don't want to be very heavy-handed when you first start this. You're going to want to be light-handed and then kind of fill it in and build up the blend as we go on. So that's what you'll see me doing here, just going back and forth to ensure that we don't have any harsh lines with the glitter. Just a little pro tip for you guys. You'll see there's a little bit of a harsh line here where I laid down Frannie, and if you sprinkle the glitter over top of it and then press it down with your finger, it will kind of force it to stick to the epoxy and helps blend any dark spots or where maybe you were too heavy-handed, and helps blend the two glitters together. Okay, I actually lied. We're using 5 glitters. So I'm going to use Espresso. That is just a finer cut of cold brew. And I'm just going to use that at the bottom to kind of fine tune that ombre that we're going for at the base. Next, I'm going in and cutting out my decal, although we're not going to lay this down until after the drip is done. I cut the decal at 4 inches wide and about 3.5 inches tall, and I used 3 different colors of vinyl. In hindsight, I probably would have only used 2, or I would have used a different third color, because although they look different in person, once I got them layered on the cup or on the decal, they really looked basically the same color. So you can't tell now that it's on the cup and epoxied over that there are 3 separate colors. They just look like the gold and then a tan or a pink color. So probably would not recommend doing that. And then once I've got the decal all taken care of, I'm going to sand the rim, starting out with my Dremel, and then I'm going to kind of fine tune that as well with a sand block. I don't remember what these are called. Sanding block? That's the word I'm looking for. And so next we're going in with 30 milliliters of epoxy, and then this powder, which is called Nice and Thick from Counterculture. I don't have any exact measurements. I just kind of add the powder and test the drip on the rim as I go along, if that makes sense. Just adding it as I need it. So I want to make sure this is pretty thick. I don't want a lot of long drips to be happening, because that's going to interfere with us laying down the decal and potentially going to run down into the vinyl, which I do not want. So I'm going to add a little bit of this ivory acrylic paint and then a little bit of white as well, just to offset that. It was a little bit too beige for me. And so we're gonna mix that in and then continue to add the Nice and Thick powder, testing that drip as we go along. And the way that I ensure that there are no lumps in the drip is to kind of smush it along the wall of the cup. I don't know if that makes sense to you guys, but you'll see me kind of pressing the epoxy mixture into the sides of the cup to smush it out. The consistency of the Nice and Thick is kind of like powdered sugar, so it has little tiny beads of clumped up powder, I guess I would say. And so that will translate into a drip if you don't make sure that those are completely smushed out of there. Once the epoxy is the consistency that I'm looking for, I'm going to take just a little bit of that epoxy mixture on my popsicle stick, and less is more here. It's going to be a pain to try and wipe this epoxy off if you get too big of a drip, so you can always add onto it, but definitely start with less. And I'm going to lay my popsicle stick pretty much flush with the rim of my cup. And then I'm going to kind of scrape that epoxy off onto the rim of the cup. And I'm just going around trying to kind of smooth out the drip before I place any of my sprinkles on there. And before I tap it down, I just want to make sure that it looks smooth and kind of replicates the foam that's on top of the coffee that you would get at like Starbucks. Before I get all of my sprinkles and things put on. Once I've got the drip applied, I'm just going to go around with my heat gun very lightly. You don't want to hold your heat gun in one spot for too long. That will cause the epoxy to flash cure and bubble up. So while I'm going around twisting this tumbler and heating up the rim, I'm going to tap it down to kind of help with gravity pulling that drip down. And then once I've got it where I want it, I'm going to wipe the rim to make sure I don't have a ton of excess of the epoxy on that rim. And then we're going to apply the sprinkles. So these adorable coffee beans are available at Peachy Glitters. I was so excited to use them, and then it worked out perfectly because this coffee themed print was in my collab box, so I thought that I would put the two together. So I'm just gonna put a couple of these beans down, and in hindsight, I probably would not have epoxied over the drip because the epoxy pooled up into the coffee beans a little bit. I had to kind of scrape the epoxy out with my nail, obviously with a glove on. But I did like the look of the coffee bean texture. So I think as long as your sprinkles and your beans are secure into the epoxy and cure into the epoxy really well, that you wouldn't have to cover them with epoxy as long as you're not a picker and you wouldn't pull the beans off or anything like that. But they adhered pretty well. I just was kind of being precautious and epoxying over them like I normally do. But anyways, I'm rambling. So I will let you watch me apply these sprinkles. I let that drip cure overnight, and then the next morning I went in with my vinyl work. I'm going to lay my decal down at the lowest point of the vinyl. So where the vinyl dips down, the smallest section of it, where there's the most glitter real estate, I guess I would say. That's where I'm going to put my vinyl because I wanted to make sure that I had a larger decal. And so putting it at a higher point of the vinyl is going to force you to have a smaller decal. So we're going to lay that down, and then I'm going to cut out some vinyl striping that is 11.5 width by 0.06 height. And I'm going to just freehand the striping around the printed vinyl at the bottom. And then we're going to curve that along the wavy line as we see fit. After all the vinyl work was applied, I threw it on my turner and put polycrylic over top of the vinyl like I always do, just to ensure that there's not going to be any lifting. I let that polycrylic air dry for about 30 minutes before going in with 2 final coats of Flynn Sisters epoxy. I do have a discount code for you guys now in the description box for anything on the Flynn Sisters Supply Shop website. After those 2 coats were cured, this cup was completely finished. Let me know what you guys thought in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Hit the bell button if you would like to be notified of future tutorials I upload every weekend. I do have a makers group on Facebook if you would like to join that as well. I've linked that in the description box, and I will see you guys next weekend.